Okay, good. So we have seen how institutions can talk about environment and how they can influence audiences in their behavior. But as public opinion now urges the corporate world to act, I guess we all agree that cultural institutions are today expected to take part in the ecological transition themselves. So we will discuss how institutions can implement sustainability with Elsa Boromee, who is Sustainability Advisor at the Muséum National d'Histoire Naturelle de Paris, Laura Gournay, who is in charge of sustainability at SNELAC, which is the French National Union of Leisure, Attraction and Cultural Spaces, and Sara, Sustainability Lead of the V&A in South Kensington in London, coming from London for us today. And via Zoom we have Paul TUKEY, who is Director of Environmental Stewardship, hello Paul, at the Glenstone Museum in Maryland in the USA. And the roundtable is moderated by Marguerite COURTEL, who is co-founder of Les Augures. She advises cultural institutions in their transition towards sustainability. Dear Marguerite, over to you.
Thank you. Can you all hear what I say? Paul, you are with us? Wonderful. So as a start, I don't know if you've seen, like a few days ago, we had some flooding in the city of Sydney in Australia. So the city just has faced major floodings, threatening the 23rd Biennale Art Biennale. This disaster is even stranger and disturbing as the Biennale imagine a world where the Australian rivers are rebelling. Heat wave, resources rarefaction, floodings are some of the many threats for the cultural sectors whose mission is to preserve the heritage. During the last World Economic Forum on global risks, 2 of the top 10 short-term global risks concern environment. It was at first extreme weather and climate action failure. Fortunately, some museums are committing we were witnessing commitment rising from, for instance, the Tate, who committed to reducing its carbon emission by 50% by 2023, sacrificing business travel by 44% since 2013. We also have the V&A, who just set up a sustainability plan. Universcience as well, or the Palais des Beaux-Arts de Lille, who just started some guides on eco-producing exhibition. But this is true that culture as a tertiary sector is at the crossroads of many other sectors, such as transport and mobility, construction side and building, digital. So culture does have a lot of impact. Museums are also key sites to accelerate climate change education. I'll be happy first to ask Paul to present yourself and to present. I think I have set up. I have a sort of the organization of the roundtable in a different way. Like everyone could present himself, but with all these technical issues, I think we will first start with you, Paul, presenting yourself and presenting the sustainability strategy that you have set up in the Glenstone Museum. So the Glenstone Museum is near Manchester in the United States. It's your turn, Paul. Can you? Okay, we cannot hear Paul. No. I'm so sorry about it. Maybe we can start with Sara. Okay, so as we are waiting for Paul to get started, I think we can start with Sara from the V&A. Thank you, Sara, for taking the channel and being with us today. So you are the sustainability leader at the V&A, and you have designed a very ambitious program called Place, People and Program. Strategy to implement. Oui. No. Hello? Is it better? Okay. Okay. So, Sara, you have designed this ambitious strategy called Place, People and Program to execute systemic, social and ecological measure into the museum. What was your process and governance strategy? What were the key objectives of this approach?
Sure. Okay, can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yeah,
it would be wonderful if we can have the slides in the meantime. Yeah, we have lost Paul, and Paul is back.
That's okay, I'll start. So I was employed at the V&A 2 years ago to create a sustainability plan. So the museum, the Victoria and Albert, is a museum of art, design and performance. We have one site in South Kensington, we have a site in East London, 2 new sites being constructed, plus partnerships in Dundee and Shekou in China, and Wedgwood in Staffordshire. So it was really the museum wasn't very confident in talking about sustainability. They've been doing lots of things over the last 10, 20 years in different areas, but they weren't very confident in articulating their vision. So I kind of came in, and my job was to really kind of consolidate all the work that had been done before, and then to amplify what we were doing. And what we decided to do was really link our sustainability plan to the mission of the museum. So we're looking to enable people through art, design and performance to contribute to a thriving planet and to shape sustainable futures. And what you often find in museums is you might have, an energy manager in the estate team, or somebody doing something in curatorial work or some programming. We wanted to take more of a holistic approach and more of a systems approach. So we looked at place, people and program, because that meant that everybody within the museum and outside the museum could see themselves somewhere. They could connect. So these are the kind of main areas that we chose. So with sustainability, there is so much we could choose, but we really need to kind of focus our resource on where we can have the most impact and where we have the most influence. So we have, I think, I can't remember how many, was it 3 to 5 million visitors a year? This was pre-COVID, and approximately 900 to 1,000 staff. And so it's a large place and lots of international relationships. So we're really looking at energy and carbon. We did set a net zero target. So we did some foundational work. We looked at our scope 1, 2 and 3 emissions. And what we've looked at doing is really kind of being challenging. So I always say that museums are kind of where universities were 10 years ago. They're kind of quite behind. And because I'm come out from a different sector, from government, higher education, engineering, I could kind of bring some of that learning to this particular role. And there's no point duplicating resource. Just see what's already out there and take what works for your organisation. So we focus on energy and carbon. Materials, which is absolutely huge. We have huge temporary exhibitions, lots of refurbishments, gallery refreshes and so on. And really, again, being really challenging, looking at embodied carbon targets. So instead of thinking about further down the line, how do we reuse or recycle, actually we're looking at making where you can make the most impact is upstream. So in the very design of your exhibition, how can you reduce the material impact? And so everything that we do is about systems thinking, and really thinking about avoidance and kind of preventative action rather than remedying things further down the line when they've happened. Because I think we're past that point. It's great to have recycling facilities and renewable energy and so on, but actually what can you do to save that energy, to save the materials up front? Procurement was a huge one. So we obviously procure huge amounts of goods and services, and there's an amazing amount of power we have as a client to really work with our suppliers. And so we're kind of really asking our suppliers what they're doing around sustainability and how they can help us meet our net zero targets. Climate resilience is another one, which I feel that every organisation, especially us, we're a heritage building, the South Kensington one, we're all experiencing the impacts of climate change now. So we have wind-driven rain events, we have overheating, we have flooding. It's all happening now, and we need to find ways to kind of protect our collections, our people, our visitors, and generally to make sure that we do what museums do, which is kind of be able to preserve collections in perpetuity. Air and water, so this is around air pollution. We're based in London, and water is general kind of like water reduction. And biodiversity as well, which is hard in a kind of very urban site. We have beehives on the roof, we produce our own honey, but there's lots more that can be done around biodiversity. And then the others I won't go through as much detail, so we want to move on. So for us, it was governance and leadership was really important. We had a lot of kind of input from our directors and our trustees. They were really behind this. But we also had a lot of momentum and pressure from our staff. So it worked in two directions. And I think you need that at both levels. You can't just have it going one way. You need to have everybody really on board and really thinking about the part they can play. Because what you're looking to do, and what we're doing with this strategy, is enabling and empowering people, because lots of people kind of have an idea of what they want to do. They're already passionate, enthusiastic and keen, and the idea is that we just want to kind of unlock that potential, and everyone is an agent of change. How do we make them kind of catalyse them to take action? So this was the governance structure that we set up, and it started so with the board of trustees. We have our executive directors. We then set up a sustainability steering group, which was at kind of leadership forum level. So these are heads of, and then the grassroots were the sustainability coordinators. So these are volunteer staff from across the organisation, and they're just keen and excitable, and it's great. They all have departmental action plans, and it's really motivating. So between all of these kind of different layers, we've kind of tried to make sure that sustainability is really embedded in the culture of the organisation. So now it's part of our corporate plan, it follows through departmental plans, and one thing that I did that I was really proud of was we started a learning and development programme. So we looked at carbon literacy for our staff. So we have 57 carbon literate members of staff. We have lots of seminars on everything from biodiversity to ethical finance, intersectional sustainability, circular design, and that's gone down really well because people need the knowledge and skills. The museum is made up of lots of professions, lots of expertise, but everyone does need to skill up, and our sustainability literacy in the sector needs to improve. And so this is what our steering group does, and this is how they're kind of set up, and the idea is that they kind of oversee implementation of the plan. So our plan is for 4 years. We've made it very public. I felt it's really important to be transparent and open, and I haven't seen many museums that have published all the actions of their plan on their website. So if you search V&A Sustainability, you'll find our plan, you'll find all the work that we're doing towards it, you'll find our blog, where different people from around the museum are contributing to the actions. And I'm really a big believer in kind of collaboration, and we're all doing this together. It's not a competitive effort. We all have to do it together. We're all connected internationally, as well as in our local communities. And it's all about kind of like the peer networks and learning from each other like this and helping people to do more. So there's so much that I've learned from other organisations and essentially just copied things and just kind of tailored them to my organisation. It saves time, it saves effort. And yeah, so this is basically the kind of terms of reference of our steering group. If we go to the last slide, so again, monitoring is really important, and you can't manage what you don't measure. This is kind of an internal document, but you can see it. This is our sustainability dashboard, and what we've looked at is in the 3 areas of place, people and programme, what is our quarterly progress? And what I want to get to the point of is where we report on financial health, we also report on carbon budget. So it becomes a normal thing. Any activity or project that happens in the museum, we're also looking at the carbon impact of that project rather than just the financial impact or the audience engagement or other measures. So this just shows we're looking at our scope 1 and 2 emissions. Scope 3 is quite difficult to actually calculate. It's 90% of our footprint. It's been reducing. Obviously with COVID, we have less business travel, we have virtual couriering, but it is difficult to kind of measure. So we only look at business travel for scope 3. We look at our waste and recycling, but again, that's only our operational waste. We don't look at the deinstall of exhibitions, our projects waste, which is huge. So I'm trying to work on improving our kind of monitoring across the organisation. And then we've got a little bit on like people, so how many coordinators we have, how many hours of learning and development were done per quarter. Over 1 year, we had 800 hours undertaken by staff, and it's part of their formal learning. It's not an extra or an add-on. Managers accept it as part of their review. This is just part of their role to know about sustainability and to make sure that they're taking action in whatever way they can. And obviously we engage on social media and reading groups and various other things. And then the last one's program. So we do have a lot around instances of learning engagement, and we found that you don't need to have just an exhibition about sustainability. You can actually bring it into, you know, digital design weekend, into your displays, into your festivals, into your school's learning program. You might be looking at design for us, you might be looking at materials, you might be looking at air pollution, biodiversity. It doesn't have to be just an exhibition about the environment. You can engage your audiences in lots of different ways on lots of different issues to do with sustainability, but we are very focused on climate justice and the idea of planetary limits. So really making people think that we are in a very limited kind of resource world, and we can't just continue by just shifting things to electric. It doesn't work like that. We do need to think of more kind of creative solutions and really think about our behaviours. So obviously I could talk about this for days, but I know you have other great speakers. So that's a whistle-stop tour of how we kind of introduced a sustainability plan and embedded it into the culture of the V&A.
Thank you so much, Sarah. It's very impressive and inspiring. I guess lots of people who will have questions at the end of the roundtable. Another very inspirative experience is the one from Paul at the Glenstone Museum. I will ask the technique, please, to try to connect with Paul, because I can't wait to hear about all the sustainability program he has set up at the Glenstone Museum. So, Paul, we have your slides.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes? Okay. Well, bonjour. I am sorry I am not there in person. When we were talking about sustainability, one of the big issues is flying all over the country with our art, right? And so it made sense to try to do this by Zoom instead of flying there for this. But I really do wish I was there in person. So can you still hear me?
We can hear you, but we cannot see you. So I'm the only one who has this chance.
Well, can you see my slides? That's fine, if you can see my slides.
It would be great to see you and your slides. We just will try a last we see you, but we don't see the slide anymore. So
Okay. Well, I can share my slides.
oh yeah, you can share your slide. I think it's better to do this way.
If I do that, I'll just share my slides. How about
Perfect.
that? Okay. If you give me some indication that you can actually see my slides, looks like you can because I can see them. Okay, so Glenstone Museum, what is it? We are in Maryland, which is the eastern part of the United States. We were founded in 2006 by Mitchell and Emily Rales. We were originally 35 acres, which is now about 300 acres, so we've grown about tenfold in our size. We are open free of charge to the public Thursday through Sunday, and we've been 100% organic maintenance on our grounds in our landscape since 2010, which is when I visited Glenstone for the very first time. That was the narrow focus at that time. They weren't really talking about sustainability in the broad topic. By 2012, Glenstone talked about plans for expanding much larger, both in land and in buildings. So we now have new galleries and much more to offer at Glenstone. And our goal, very simple goal, we wanted to be the most sustainable museum in the world. And we set out to do that in a number of ways. This is our new signature building called the Pavilions, designed by Thomas Pfeiffer in New York. And it literally exists in the earth, 50 feet deep into the ground. So what you're seeing there is just the very top of the building. So most of the building exists below ground, which seems very dark and ominous to people from the outside sometimes, but actually it's all daylit because all of the light comes in through the roof. And so we save significant amounts of energy just in the way that we designed the building. You're also seeing the meadow there, which is a 45-acre native plant meadow. And people take a 7 to 10 minute walk from the car to get to the buildings. And we want them to reconnect with nature. Our mission statement is the seamless integration of art, architecture, and nature. Some of you may recognize this. This was at Versailles in France in the year 2000 or 2001. It's Split Rocker by Jeff Koons. We acquired the sculpture and erected it at Glenstone in 2012. And we will be planting it for the 10th consecutive year later on at the end of April. It's about 24,000 flowering plants. And we do it with our all natural, all organic protocols. So we're very, very proud of this. Now, we look at Glenstone through the lens of sustainability, what we call the 5 pillars. So it's not just outdoor in the grounds or indoors in the buildings and our energy. We look at sustainability in the way that the social capital, the value of the community. So we try to do a lot of teaching of the community and inspiring the community. We also celebrate a lot of knowledge capital and human capital from the associates who work at Glenstone. So we spend a significant amount of time internally talking about sustainability, literally almost every day, certainly every week. We reinforce something, and we're committed to preservation and sustainability in everything that we do. And we say this all of the time, and all of our new associates who come to Glenstone get a full orientation, a presentation from me and others about how important we think this is. As the previous speaker mentioned, leadership needs to come from the top. So Mr. and Mrs. Rails instituted this. They hired me to implement it, and we talk about it all of the time. So it becomes part of our core values in our culture. And then over time, some people say, how do I get started, right? Where do I begin? You can't do everything all at once. So we've now been at this for 12 years, and this timeline shows how we have approached it. So we started with organic landscape care. We added in composting. So we compost all of our food and all of our landscape waste. We recycle everything that we can. We recycle about 80% of all of our office materials at Glenstone. So only 20% is going in the trash. That's a very good number. We started reforesting the trees. We planted 11,000 trees in the last 7 years. We grow all native plants in our meadows. That means native birds, native insects, and other native animals have plenty of food. We instituted public transportation, our environmental education center, and now we do wildlife mapping and bird mapping, so we understand all of the creatures that come and live at Glenstone relative to what we decide to plant. So we have taken this on all the time, and we're always adding and continuously improving every way that we can. And we like to say that you cannot manage what you don't measure. I know our previous presenter had some metrics up there. We look at everything. We literally measure everything that we possibly can. It's how Mr. Rails made a lot of money in his life, by measuring the performance every single minute of every single day. We do that. We weigh all of our recycling. We know what building it came from. We know what's in the bags. And it's a cultural institution and manifestation of doing this, because you can't just check a box. You have to live it. You have to breathe it. And we do that by reinforcing through the metrics that we share. This is an application called Power BI. So that's a Microsoft application called Power BI, and it makes it very easy for us to put our data into a presentation format that our associates can understand, and then we can use these graphics when we present at situations like today. Finally, the big goal here is carbon mapping. That's looking at everything that we do in the context of carbon, either emissions, so it goes up into the air, or we're sequestering it and we're holding it in the trees and in the ground. So on the left-hand side, you see that we use a lot of electricity. You can see that our guest commuting, all of our visitors, that's 575 million metric tons of carbon. 500, and a lot of employee commuting, because we exist 20 miles, a long way from the closest city, which is Washington, D.C. We also burn some natural gas. And so all of this driving and all of this energy and electricity, that's bad, right? We're trying to reduce that as much as we can, but we'll never be able to reduce it entirely. On the other side, all of the good things that we do, we purchase all of our electricity from wind power. We do have some solar power on campus, but all of our ponds and wetlands, our forest, our recycled building materials, all of our meadows, recycling our office and building materials, growing our organic lawns, all of those things sequester carbon. I actually spoke at the French embassy here in the United States, and I said if everybody in the United States started taking care of their lawn in a natural way without synthetic chemical fertilizers and weed killers like Roundup, if we started doing things naturally, we could solve the climate crisis in our lifetime if we start taking a natural approach to landscaping. So that has been our approach at Glenstone. We're super happy to share this information, and we'd love for you to come see us, and we can talk more deeply. And someday I will come to France and we'll talk more about this. And so I'm going to unshare here, and then I'll be available for questions at the end.
I'm actually wondering if we should ask question right now, or if with to Paul. Yeah, it's maybe not.
I do not hear you.
Okay. Let's continue, because I'm seeing time passing, and we will see if we can ask question to Paul. If you have some question, don't hesitate to write it down.
I hear you now. I hear you now. I do hear you now.
Yeah, I think we will continue, and then we will ask question later to you, Paul. Okay? So you were telling us how you are measuring all the time, and also the link of the Glenstone Museum with biodiversity, and it makes a link with Elsa BOROMEE from the museum, the Natural History Museum in Paris. So, of course, the museum has a concern for climate and biodiversity in its DNA. You are sustainability director, and you are in all France, from measuring carbon emissions of the 13 sites to collecting data on biodiversity. You've been working a lot on changing the exhibition practices, especially for the last exhibition right now called The Limits of Humanity. I guess it's a link to The Limits of Growth, who's been, it has been the anniversary of the Meadows, I don't know, I was wondering. You've been implementing good practices for 10 years in the museum, and I would be very happy to go back on the responsible exhibition strategy you've started and what you've been through.
Hello, everyone. I'm going to try not speak too fast, because I do tend to speak very quickly for the interpreters back there. So I'm going to give you a summary of the museum presentation, because Agnès Parent already gave you a presentation a few minutes ago, and most people are still here. So the thing to keep in mind is that it's a public institution, scientific and culturally based, with 5 missions: research, preservation and enrichment of the collections, education, with a master's and a PhD, with over 450 to 500 students, and the dissemination of scientific knowledge through our galleries, zoos, botanical gardens, and expertise, scientific expertise, which means how the museum coordinates a solution, a scientific solution, with a request, say, from the ecological transition ministry, or a private company. It could be saving bears in the Pyrenees Mountains. So with the goal, it could be that is to accumulate knowledge to better protect nature. And with that being the magnificent goal, it was necessary for a scientific institution to tackle sustainable development. And our procedure has been in place for over 10 years, started in 2008. We signed the public institution charter by the ecological transition ministry, sorry. And our goals are simple, that are prior to each major project, we have to look at sustainable development. And if we look at the governance that my colleagues mentioned, that's really important. So our sustainable development approach since 2017 is headed up by the general director, so at the top of our organization. So he manages this, and he has a sustainable development advisor that works with him. I was first a project leader in 2017 at the museum, and I've been the SD advisor since 2017. And our budget, we have a budget for events, for establishing the educational curriculum, using tools to measure our carbon impact across our sites in Paris, in France. More specifically, I was asked to talk about what we do in the topic we're all interested in here, and that's accountability and responsible exhibitions. In 2012, we started informally looking at this, and we set up a task force. So it was one of my predecessors. So the SD contact person was sort of in as a support or backup to colleagues, and didn't have any, say, specific technical expertise. These would be the colleagues for assembling, disassembly of exhibitions who had the expertise. So then we had a production designer who's still at the museum working on the exhibitions, aux frontières de l'humain, so at the border, at the edge of being human, that I worked on. And in that working group or task force, we would call on other museum experts. Could be exhibition coordinator, project coordinator. We have someone here in the room here participated in the projects. And people also work on the feline exhibition. So if necessary, then we'd have a legal expert, procurement experts, and so on and so forth. So some concrete actions to explain what we did over the past few years. In 2012, when the working group came together, the first topic addressed was waste, because waste is visible. You can see it. You have several containers, and there's some material that's only used 9 months, and then it's tossed. So the first observation there was we realized that this was shared across France by other stakeholders, other players, the Louvre, Universal Science, Quai de Branly Museum, and others. So collectively, with my colleagues, we began in 2016 to drive change in French legislation so that when we had end-of-life material following our production designs from 2012 to 2016, we focused a lot on that point. Also worked, though, on other aspects, such as working on eco-design, permanent exhibitions such as a Natural History Museum, the Musée de l'Homme, another strength. There's one of my colleagues focused on using wood and the benefits of wood in layout and the journey of the apes. And then we had deforestation exhibition, so we'd have wood that was managed sustainably, but we also had to think about the responsible use of that wood to limit waste and unused portions. So a dialogue kicked in with the designers and the people involved in layout, so that we could reduce the size of our backdrop, so that we could optimize the use of the wood. And then when legislation 2016 kicked in, and it legalized the donation of production design equipment. So in-house, we optimized that, and we did, and we still do systematically. At the end of each exhibition, we donate that to associations, and we reuse anything and everything we can and other spaces in the museum. Thank you. Now, regarding the measures, just like my colleagues, we came to look at some metrics, some indicators, and we started thinking about having a broader approach, not focusing only on waste. So we needed to stop looking at exhibitions from the small lens. So we used a tool called the life cycle analysis tool to give us an idea of the environmental impact of an exhibition. So the project wasn't prepared ahead of time. It emerged from a need, and so then we got started. And because life cycle analysis requires a lot of data collection ahead of time, so it's always better to prepare that ahead of time. So we opted to use a tool from construction because we don't have a life cycle analysis for exhibitions. We don't have that tool available. So, in fact, we hacked the use of this, as it were, to be able to identify environmental impacts of the bear species exhibition. We looked at each step of the life cycle, from selecting the subject all the way to the end of the exhibition, to see where the impacts were located. And it wasn't prepared ahead of time, as I said, so we had to use a different tool. We looked at the three areas that contributed to waste. So we looked at materials, water consumption, water use, and energy use. So I spared you the table with all the numbers to give you a summary here. So we have several observations. The first one being the main position, the main area was materials, of course, for an exhibition that makes sense. It jumps out at you. But here we were able to measure it, and we realized that there were three specific materials that stood out in terms of contribution to the environmental impact of the bear species. And this was the floor covering, the flooring, so mostly carpet, the medium, the NDF. So these were particle fiber boards and the wood used for the signage and posters. So back to carpet. Now carpet, the rugs are the equivalent of 200,000 liters of water on the entire life cycle of the exhibition, from the extraction of the raw materials, its processing, its use on our floors and walls, and to final destruction. So making those observations across this, we then wanted to move to the next stage, which was how we could implement all the recommendations in a concrete exhibition to reduce the environmental impact. And so in a scientific teaching institution, when we talk about experimenting, that's usually accepted. Not everybody can do that, though. So we had a green light to do this, but like zero budget. So what we tried to do was look at this and tackle four different issues, four different questions across the exhibition. For the Frontières de l'Humain, my colleagues Judith and Augures, Madame Augures. And so we looked at the sobriety of the materials, supply of responsible source, and a clean and end of life. So looking at the sobriety of the materials, we encountered some difficulties. It's really good to be transparent when you run into trouble. This exhibition used a lot of materials, so we weren't able to move forward on materials for this exhibition, but we were able to identify some of the barriers that stopped us from going further, and maybe we can use that on the next exhibition. So now regarding material supply, we had two areas. The first one being responsible sourcing, meaning we have a library of our materials because the sourcing was an issue there. So we gave access to the production designers and the layout team to have this list of materials that were eco-friendly so that we could have the more responsible materials that would work for us. And we looked at a second area in eco-responsible materials. We wanted to get material that was already considered waste from a source area, ressourcery, and we wanted to use that. And so this broke down lots of barriers, but there were lots of barriers that came up. So I'll talk to you more about that in a minute. Okay, I have to hurry up. You have 1 minute left. Now, with regards to eco-production, we set up structures using screws to put them together, and so there's an impact there. In disassembly, you need more men, higher costs there to disassemble. It takes more time, but we have committed to reuse 90% of the wood panels that we have. So the end-of-life question we already have associations we're working in partnerships with to allow for the reuse of the materials. On my last slide, thank you. These are concrete experiences of what we did. So as I said, the carpet was the material with the most impact. We found the solution for this exhibition. We used only 40 square meters, so smaller surface area, and we went for a higher quality, more expensive material, but 100% recyclable. And that will be recycled at the end of that exhibition life. And so we also looked at where the artwork came from. Only 3 came from abroad. Only 3 pieces came from abroad. And I could talk about the integration of the end-of-life material maybe at the question. So I'll stop here. Sorry, I was just a bit too talkative. I'm sorry.
And I really want to have a little time for Laura as well. People don't really know actually Laura, so I'm just going to presenting. It was super interesting, Elsa. Thank you for all of this. I hope we will have time for questions. So Laura is a different type of organization because she is working for the SNELAC, which is a trade union advising, defending leisure organization in France. So in 2020, the SNELAC has created its own certification label entitled Divertissement Durable, which means sustainable entertainment. So can you talk a little bit more about the label and how it works, and also how you can advise the members of your organization?
Bonjour à toutes et à tous.
Hello, everyone. I do work for the SNELAC. It's a professional trade organization for private entertainment in France, amusement parks, aquariums, museum, private hotels, natural sites. So diversity of stakeholders working together to defend their interest, working in different areas of operations of cultural sites. But for the past 15, 20 years, we've been looking at SD issues. We have commitments that are outstanding from the time we get started. And these are areas that tend to be in rural areas. So they tend to pay attention to the impact they'll have on their local areas. And so for about a good 10, 15 years, we're seeing a strong upswing in cultural and leisure activity undertakings that want to really respect the sustainable development pillars, and they're taking a long-term approach. So we were looking at about 5 years ago where these leisure sites would be. They wanted to be involved in SD, but didn't really know how to do it, how to get structured, how to implement, how to include performance indicators. And so we considered then that most of the procedures in France are costly and were difficult to apply to the specificities of leisure activities. That's why we came up with our own CSR label called Sustainable Entertainment to implement an SD approach over the long term with continuous improvement. So then the label functions in 2 different phases. The first part is the implementation of the procedure, and then the second part is getting the label through independent auditors Now, to create the label, it was co-constructed by the SNELAC and several different pilot sites in the entertainment industry to make sure that it fit their needs. We created our own repository. Next slide. Based on the 3 SD pillars. So, of course, we have economic, social, and environmental, including all of the specificities of the entertainment industry, meaning socially you have specificities due to employability, because our activity tends to be seasonal, and we're going to cover access so that people with specific needs can can have access, focusing on local participation in the boutiques and the restaurant areas, the food and beverage areas, making sure that everything that is of interest and everything in the operations of the local site and all of the stakeholders, the visitors, the employees, the suppliers, and so on and so forth. We had this repository then, and this is the departure point of the label, and this is accompanied by a certification kit with the template documents to help the locations implement the procedure, because our association has almost all of the stakeholders. You have Puy du Fou, you have Asterix, you have Disneyland Paris. We have many locations though that are in the regional areas that don't have the same level of maturity in SD as other areas. So the goal for us was to include everyone. So we have certification that's modular in 3 phases. There's the awareness raise, there's the in attention phase, and then there's the experts. So we'll ask for more from a location that has greater maturity. But the goal is to make sure that all of the entertainment locations can, first of all, start the procedure and then get their label at the end of the day. So the certification kit then will help the locations kick off the procedure with data sheets that are practical, best practices guides, and little by little we'll fine-tune this because the label is very recent. Its inception was 2018, launched in 2020. So individual customized support for the locations who start their procedure. So support can be at various phases, maybe kickoff, explaining how to implement the action plan, how to make that formal, then the implementation of the procedure with the KPIs to improve existing actions, and then support that can be also just before the final audit phase to make sure that they're getting close to compliance. And it's a continuous improvement label as well. So we have renewal audits, every 2 years to take stock of the situation and then improve the performance. Now, once the procedure is implemented and we continue driving that forward, locations that are ready will go through the audit. So we have 3 auditors who are independent that we've selected based on technical specs to carry out the audits to grant the label to these locations. Then we have the continuous improvement phase, and we help the locations improve on a continuous basis. So we have 1 label, but also the association has the SD committee that is behind the label, and with their task force, we would get feedback from them across the sites, and the more advanced ones from beginners to advanced, to work on and develop new tools, guides, designing guides to be able to improve and work on these very complex areas. And to give you an idea, last couple of years we've been working a lot on waste management, optimizing energy use, and this year we're looking at optimizing a carbon footprint with a sectorial method guide to make sure all of the locations optimize their carbon footprint, and then to set up a strategy. So next slide, the label was launched in 2020, so we have 5 locations with their label, as you can see up here. There are many others that are have already launched the process, and then we'll continue driving this forward, and they will help us by sharing their experience with creating tools, and how everyone is working together to reach this goal of improving and moving towards a transition for more sustainable tourism. And that's just how you can get in touch with me if you want additional information. But I'm sure you have some questions. I tried to go quickly, and I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Laura, super rapide, super efficace.
Thank you very much, Laura. Very fast, very effective. So 4 talks that I hope inspired you. Any questions there from the audience? I think we've got 3 minutes remaining. Hello. I just had a question regarding the procedure and designing exhibitions. Often you run into fire legislation issues. Now, in buildings that have been eco-designed, we know that there were procedures for measuring things that are out of protocol or off protocol. Can we see something like that for museums in these procedures? Or do you work with inspection offices, or have you encountered any of those kinds of issues? That's a very good question. Construction they're 10 years ahead of everybody else. They have a system of certification for reusing, re-employing materials. And so there are difficulties with insurance companies, and we're very far behind them in terms of the layout of exhibitions. You have to keep in mind that, say, the project for the exhibition, the Frontières de l'Humain, we wanted to collect waste, and that has a legal status in France. And in fact, it ended up offsetting the benefits for the PV certification and fire resistance. So at some point it maintains its integrity, but to re-employ that in your production design, you can't, because the waste, in fact, offsets the gains that you would have. So no bureau was willing to work with us on those issues. We also questioned Muséum and the Scientific and Technical Center in Construction, and they suggested we certified the materials, and they oriented us to the fact that should we come up with a solution to collect at the source, so it wouldn't be waste then, and if we maintained the elements in their entirety, in their integrity, we reuse them in similar conditions to the initial use, then the benefit of the PV then could be conserved once it got validated. But in fact, everything has to be built from the bottom up. So today our task forces are looking at this in France. I'm not sure what's going on abroad, but looking at how to maintain the benefit of these panels that could be reused or same materials. Right now, we can't seem to figure that out. Any other questions? We may be out of time. A question for Paul, maybe. Oh, we do see a question back here in the room. Hi, everyone. Thank you for this presentation. This is not necessarily just for Paul, but it's for everyone in the institutions. I hear a lot about responsibility and waste, biodiversity, and so on, but I don't hear much about society. We talked about a label, but again, that's really important for ecological transition, environmental transition in the future. But in your institutions, Paul, and the others, do you take that into account that it's at the workers level and their seasonal workers and access and flexible work hours and that for the visitors too?
Okay, so the question is about societal sorry, the measure you can do for society, such as like time scale for people working at the museum, or how you can, because we talked about a lot about environment, but what have you set up for all the social aspect of a sustainable policy?
Well, so what have we set up for the social aspect of sustainable policies?
Yes.
That's really focused on education and sharing, and frankly, doing things like this. There's an institution, and I can't quote it right now, but I'd be happy to share it with you, that has done some research on the value of education. And researchers believe that institutions that engage in climate education should in fact get carbon credits for that education to help us justify the efforts. So if we can inform the public, we can inspire the public, we then invite the public to participate in saving the planet. I call it the 3 I's. So it's the 3 I's. Inform, inspire, and invite. And we focus on that. And so we have a goal of how many people that we reach each year in our educational efforts. And that's really the social focus.
Yeah, I think that's a really, really important question, because you can't have a healthy environment without a healthy society. And I think it's coming, but I don't think we're there yet in terms of making sure that they're connected. So we look at things in museums in terms of, say, accessibility and our audiences. I think connecting to the internal staff side, so looking at things like equity, diversity, inclusion, and connecting that with the sustainability efforts is really important. And I think it's starting to happen, but I don't think, sometimes there's a dissonance. Sometimes it doesn't always connect. And I think there's still work to be done to kind of bring those two aspects together a bit more.
Côté France, je m'entends pas, je sais pas si on m'entend. On m'entend?
Now, in France, in your question, we have a lot of things to talk about. We have the social and the societal section in both. Now, as regards society, we can talk about accessibility that you mentioned. We have standards to encourage strongly, perhaps compel cultural institutions to adapt for the best access for public, such as people who might be excluded, such as people living with impairment. At Museum, we've been working several years recently on accessibility. We're in older buildings. So adapting historic monuments is done differently from, say, a new establishment complies with the most recent legislation. And so financially, it's very complex for historical buildings. Now, as regards support, dissemination, we have actions that are carried out to reach broad, larger audiences. We have, say, support, we have Braille, we have like aspects of manipulation to give you a concrete idea. Now, socially speaking, we have our HR directors, and we'll look at issues that are related to legislation, so gender equality. We have answers, we have solutions when we see problems coming up as regards to unequal pay in our teaching area. That's quite specific. There we have a substantial policy to support our agents with social workers who come and, as it were, sort of smooth the gaps between public employees and others, so to get a better balance in terms of home-work life.
I think it's time to finish our discussion, our panel. Thank you, everyone, for participating. Thank you, Paul, for being with us from Glenstone. Thank you for Sara for coming from London. And of course, you can talk with our panelists by now.